Our life is defined by the stories we live out. Not the stories we say we believe, but the ones we actually believe.
Welcome to Back to the Future podcast. My name is Victor Sadia, and I talk with brilliant minds and hearts of people who want to uproot and transform the current health and wellness paradigm. Todd Henry is a speaker, author, and founder of Accidental Creative, a company that works with people and teams to foster creativity. He speaks frequently on productivity and leadership and is the author of The Accidental Creative, Die Empty, and many other books. On this episode, we spoke about creativity and how the creative life depends on living at the margins of your own identity. In a complex world, we might all acknowledge that everything is interconnected, but we seldom see ourselves as the interconnectors. We're always expecting someone else to understand the connections and work with them. In that sense, our personal experience is so unique that no one else can see what we see. The future of interdisciplinary and creative work depends on giving ourselves permission to work as weavers between disciplines and ways of life. Our greatest asset is our intuition, and by pairing it with creative stories, we can discover new identities that will co-create a more lovable and sustainable future. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Today we have Todd Henry. Todd, thank you so much for doing this.
Well, Victor, I'm so excited to see you again. I'm excited to be here for this conversation. Thank you for inviting me.
So the first time I met you, we were in backstage at the Green Room in Festival de las Ideas Puebla. This was 2 months ago. And I distinctly remember you like sitting and standing at the back, having a coffee or something, and just appreciating the scene. And you had this sort of aura of just be feeling very comfortable in your body. And I approached you and we had a very nice conversation. You have such a sweet voice. And I'm so happy to have you again here, because now we will have more time to really connect and let's go to that moment where you are at an event and you are about to go on stage or the day after, and you're soaking into the ideas that are floating around. Who is Ted on those moments that you're traveling all over the world in these events, and who are you when you are there?
Well, I always see those opportunities as a gift, the opportunity to be able to share what I'm passionate about with a group of people who are ready to receive what I'm passionate about. That is a rare gift that, and I recognize how precious that is. And so I always, in those moments, there are always things to be nervous about. There are things to be stressed about. There are schedules to meet, and there's travel that can always be kind of a little bit unpredictable. And so when I'm finally in that moment where I'm about to be able to do what it is I love to do, I always try to ground myself in that place and remind myself that my primary job anytime I walk into a room is to, in whatever way I can, to love the people in that room. And sometimes if I'm in I'm walking into a meeting of senior executives for a company that's going through a difficult time, sometimes loving those people can mean saying some difficult things to them, because that's what they need in that moment. That's the best way to love the people in the room. Sometimes, like at the festival, sometimes it's to go in and just to encourage the people in the room, because I know we had a lot of, I know there were a lot of students in the room and also a lot of entrepreneurs and people who were just trying to figure out, how to be the best and most contributive member of society they could be. And so I saw my job as just to love them by encouraging them and, prompting them not to succumb to fear and comfort in their life. So that's really what I'm doing. If you see me over in the corner, I'm just trying to ground myself and remind myself of why I'm there and what it is I'm about to do.
There's this saying that you cannot love others if you don't love yourself first. How does this love of Todd for Todd being developed all over over time?
That's a nobody has ever asked me that question before. I spend a tremendous amount of time first thing in the day reflecting, writing, journaling, thinking, meditating, and spending a lot of time kind of centering in on what I'm actually experiencing, what I'm actually feeling. One of the, I think, great tragedies of the age that we live in is that we're very mentally busy, meaning that we're constantly distracted to the point that I think many people don't even know what they're really thinking. They haven't taken time to stop, to pause, to synthesize the patterns of what's really going on inside of them. And so the biggest gift that I ever received was from a friend who about 23, 24 years ago told me that the first thing he does in the day is he takes a notebook and he goes and he sits in a comfortable chair and he just sits there for 20 to 30 minutes. And I said, well, what do you do? And he said, I don't do anything. I just sit in the chair for 20 to 30 minutes. And whatever comes to my mind, I write it down. And what I realized later was what he was doing was exactly what I just described, which is he was learning what was on his mind. Because often, right, when we awaken from sleep, often our mind is fresh with whatever has been, whatever patterns have been synthesized and formed during our sleep, which is when our mind often consolidates memories and does all kinds of restorative work. And so I started that same practice 20 years ago, and it's been transformative to me. Just to spend time, with a notebook, sitting and thinking and allowing things without editing, allowing things to pop to the top of my mind and record them. So that's probably the way that honestly, it's the way that I love myself the best, is by allowing myself the freedom to actually understand what I'm thinking and feeling at any given moment without editing those thoughts or feelings. And I think that's something that people wrestle with too. I think we don't allow ourselves to think thoughts that we think we shouldn't think, and we don't allow ourselves to feel emotions that we think are inappropriate. And the reality is we're going to feel those things and we're going to think those things. It's not the thinking or the feeling that matters. It's the action that matters. It's how we act on those things, right? And if we don't pause long enough to understand what we're really thinking and feeling, sometimes those actions become compulsive. That's why people often engage in self-destructive behavior, because they aren't in tune enough with what they're really thinking and feeling. And so the net result is they're going to try to get whatever it is they think they need regardless. And sometimes that turns into self-destructive or compulsive behavior. So for me, I've found that the way to avoid that is just by spending that time synthesizing patterns. And by the way, it's also very good for business. It's good for idea generation as well. So
Yeah, I think that allowing the idea of writing down in a notebook something that no one, not even you, might even reread it, so that you allow to be free to experience emotions that you don't understand or you can even name, or even have risk being atrocious or overly, whatever adjective you want to put there, and see that's happening. And if we don't allow ourselves that freedom of observing those things that are there, there's no way we can love ourselves, because love entails loving everything that we are.
yes,
and as you say,
yes.
it's not about what you're thinking, but what you end up doing. So if you are not really taking action of those rare things that might happen and happens to all of us, then you love yourself more, because then there's this separation and understanding that you are you, and the you that you go to the world is also part of this creative self-knowledge and self-creation process.
Yes. Yeah. And I think also another thing that we often miss, and I think I read an article about this recently, or it may have been in a conversation with someone that I had for the podcast. So forgive me if you're listening to this and this was actually somebody's thought that I'm stealing right now, but I can't remember the source. But we need to be in constant dialogue with our past self and with our future self, meaning the person that we have been, and not allowing regret to shape our current decisions, because sometimes, we make decisions now because we regret something that happened in the past that we couldn't even control maybe. So we have to be very careful not to allow regret to shape our future or our current decisions, but also we need to be making agreements with our future self. So one way that we love ourselves is by making agreements with our future self about how we're going to care for our body, how we're going to care for our mind. We're going to, make certain that we're making the right decisions, that we're investing in our relationships, so that in 5 years or 10 years, should we live that long, we will have a healthier, more productive garden because we planted seeds and took care of them today. And so, I think that people live so much in the moment, they make decisions, with their gut, and they don't necessarily consider the implications of those decisions on their future self. They just say, well, I'll figure that out later. But what we do today has profound implications on tomorrow, a year from now, 5 years from now, and how we're going to be living and experiencing the world.
I've been journaling also for the last, I don't know, 5, 6 years. And here's my journal. And one thing that really helped me was to actually I wrote a book on scarcity and abundance, and to see that I had this ingrained belief of a scarce universe and a scarce self and a scarce, and the way I wrote was just from that mindset, like there's not enough and I am not enough. And once I understood this very subtle but profound distinction between working and operating from a place of abundance, the content might be the same on the journal, but the form, the way you express it and the way you open possibilities changed a lot for me. And I think that's something that also would love to have everyone having journaling with, at least working through this mindset of abundance, which I know you talk a lot about.
Yes. Yeah. And that is one of the benefits of journaling, is that you can begin to recognize patterns over time, different kinds of ruminations, maybe that you default to, different patterns or soundtracks or thoughts that just kind of go over and over in your head. And you may never be aware of those patterns if you don't if you're not journaling them and you're not going back and rereading your journals. So I love that you've been doing that. I love that that's been beneficial to you. But that mindset, as you said, that mindset of generosity and that mindset of abundance is very important, especially when it comes to the creative process, which is my area of specialty. We have to believe that there is an infinite supply of ideas, opportunities, connections to be made, patterns to be formed, innovations to be forged. We have to believe that there's a certain amount of optimism that's necessary in order to exist as a creative being in the world. And I know I spoke about this at the festival. It's an idea I've been really exploring a lot lately. Is why do some people tend to engage in brave action consistently, and other people seem to shrink from the moment? And one of the key factors is that sense of optimism, that they believe that there is a better possible future. They believe that there is abundance out there for them, or they believe that there's abundance in the world and that they are a part of bringing that about in some capacity. When we lack that, we tend to circle up. We tend to protect what we already have. We tend to defend our property or our turf. And the net result of that is our world becomes a smaller and smaller set of concentric circles. Our world shrinks, our influence shrinks, our perspective on what's possible definitely shrinks. So I love that that's something that you're discovering, that, and hopefully that's been helpful to you. How has that affected how you approach your life and your work and your days since you've discovered that?
Yes, actually, this interview is a good example because since I invited you, we scheduled it right away. I usually give myself a few more weeks to work on research and have a lot of notes. I usually come with at least 4 pages of notes. Today I came in with 2, and I was just stressing, like, only 2 pages, and it was just a matter of breathing a bit before starting this conversation and understanding that there's an infinite source. And just the first question, the first comment that we started, we just opened a whole new world. So it's also flowing with this idea that just trusting the process and be open to surprises and not controlling everything. Your intuition is so powerful. You might have a lot of encyclopedias in your head, but your intuition draws from a much larger cosmic encyclopedia. And I think that's one of the things that I've been practicing on. And yeah, this conversation is just a reminder of this infinite source of ideas, abundance, and all the things that exist.
Yeah. Yes. I love that. And so one of my good friends, Mitch Joel, talks about the squiggly line. Most careers are a squiggly line. They're not a straight linear path. They're a squiggly line. The way that we discover what we have to contribute, the way that we discover our productive passion, the thing that we're willing to spend ourselves on behalf of for the good of other people, is often through trial and error and experimentation and taking small risks and discovering and learning and those kinds of things. When we have a mindset of protection or preservation, it's really difficult to ever discover your productive passion because you're not willing to risk enough to get outside of your comfort zone because you're so afraid you're going to lose what you already have. And the net result is you forfeit all that you have to gain in your attempt to protect what you already have. And that is such a high price to pay. And yet I see so many people. And by the way, I'm not just talking about your career. I'm talking about relationships, your contribution, your service to your community, friendships, acts of generosity. All of those things require you to get outside of yourself and to play and to experiment, and then to pay attention to the patterns and see where you seem to be especially valuable, especially well received. And so many people never discover what they're truly capable of because they're so afraid that they're going to lose what they already have.
Yes, and that's paradoxical in a sense, because sometimes, and most of the times, we do change our identity through a forced crisis. That's something that comes from the outside, and you are forced to, step into this hero's journey and change your identity of who you are. And then you are almost always grateful to the process, to the crisis, and all those things. And yet, when we are in a place of more creativity and calm, we still run from those identity shifts and changes, not inviting them, but as you said, just staying behind the lines when you know that step brought so much joy and abundance and knowledge and friends and whatever to your life. And I think it's paradoxical because for obvious reasons. So how can we invite from a place of abundance the change in identity of who you are, and walk that risky but at the same time so enriching line,
Yeah, so I would frame it a little differently. I think we're saying the same thing, maybe just using different terminology, but I would say instead of changing identity, I would say discovering identity. I think that we uncover who we are as we take risks, as we explore what Stephen Johnson called the adjacent possible. He was referring to evolutionary biology. He was talking about innovation and borrowing that terminology from evolutionary biology, where he said that we explore the adjacent area immediately around a problem, and we play with ideas and we experiment until something clicks, until something falls into place. And then we experiment around that area until something clicks. And I think as we interact with others, as we take risks, as we try things, as we learn new skills, I think we discover what it is that we're capable of. We're uncovering a part of our identity, a part of who we are. And really who we are is defined by how other people receive us, which is, again, a paradox for a lot of people because they think that they're an island. They think that they're moving through life as this, sort of completely autonomous person who is isolated and a one-off unique incident in the course of human history. And the reality is that we all exist as a network, and we discover ourselves in the context of community. We uncover our identity in relationship to how other people receive us. Well, to do that, we have to try a lot of things. We have to see how people receive us in different contexts. I never realized that I was a teacher until I was put into situations where I had to teach as part of my leadership job. And then in the course of doing that over many years, I discovered, I think teaching is part of what I do. I think I'm able to take really complex things and synthesize, fairly simple patterns out of these really complex things and then communicate them to other people. I never would have discovered that had I not taken a leadership role that I didn't know that I was perfectly equipped for at the time. Turns out I thought I was going to do one thing with my life. I ended up doing something completely different because of those learnings. And so in order to discover ourselves, we have to get outside of ourselves. We have to refuse to allow comfort to cause us to settle in. I think I quoted Khalil Gibran at the festival as well. Khalil Gibran wrote, "Verily, the lust for comfort murders the passion of the soul and then walks grinning in the funeral," right? When we lust after comfort, when we make comfort our primary objective, it murders the passion of our soul. And we can't allow that to happen if we want to live a life of growth and contribution.
Yeah. Wow. I just realized a few weeks ago that I was also a journalist. With this podcast, you end up doing
Yes.
some sort of journalism. In this podcast, there's a lot of health professionals that basically are playing at the margins of their identities as health professionals, a
Mm,
physician, a coach, a psychologist. And I think health and wellness is now calling to all of us to understand that we're not just one label that you learn for 5 years in school and then you just have to apply that methodology, but bring yourself as a whole person to the equation of healing someone. That implies using other methodologies and other areas which even your own profession might dismiss as less scientific or alternative, or even it doesn't have anything to do with this. But a psychologist might also be a chef, might also be a consultant, a politician, a parent, and bringing all those roles together in this healing process is so important. And at the same time, staying transparent that you don't have all the answers. You're just playing with those identities. How do you
yes.
think we can legitimize this socially? Because as you said, our identity is built from the outside in too. To legitimize this, trying out other suits publicly and not really rushing for trying to allocate our health professionals or whoever in a specific box.
I think it's a fantastic question. As we learn more about the world, we understand how interconnected things really are in a way that maybe we didn't suspect. I sat next to, on a recent flight, I was speaking last week in Sacramento, California, and I sat on my flight next to a gastroenterologist who was educating me about the microbiome and some of the things that we're learning about gut health. And it was a fascinating conversation. I learned more about stool than I would ever want to know, and more about about gut health than I would ever want to know. But what was fascinating was he was talking about how in his role he has had to learn about so many other medical disciplines because he's realizing how interconnected everything is. And our careers are the same way. Our contribution to the world is the same way. Typically there is, we tend to think of ourselves as, like you said, I'm a journalist, right? Or I'm sort of a journalist because I'm doing this podcast. It's very true. There's a kernel of something that is playing out through your journalism, right? But if you want to be a journalist, you do the work of a journalist, which means that you follow your curiosity, you ask questions. Well, you can do that through a podcast. You can do that through a direct interview. You can do that through an essay. You can do that in any number of ways. There's some part of you, of your contribution, that right now is playing out in the form of journalism. The same thing applies to people in the medical profession. What are you trying to do as a medical professional? You're trying to make people healthy. You're trying to help them live more productive lives, to be productive members of society, to help them find health and wholeness and meaning in what they do. Part of that's going to be your specialty, but part of that also needs to be a holistic understanding of how all of these medical disciplines connect, how they intersect. And then you probably, as an individual, not you, Victor, but you, the listener, probably have some unique perspective because of your combination of passion, skills, and experiences that you bring to that interconnectivity of those disciplines. But we often quiet our own voice. We often listen solely to the voices of others. We quiet our own intuition, which is, by the way, the most valuable thing that we bring to the table is our intuition, our ability to synthesize. We have to train ourselves to bring that intuition boldly and freely to all of these disciplines, to ask questions and to not be afraid to have a unique perspective, a unique voice in the midst of all of that. And I think if we all did that and then we sort of shared what we're seeing, I think a lot of these discoveries that we're looking for would be accelerated, but because people retreat to their silos, it's the lack of communication and sort of the lack of an intersection between a lot of these disciplines, I think, that's causing us to stall our progress on some of the things that are really important.
That's a very powerful answer, my friend, because as health professionals or whoever, we understand that everything is interconnected, but we don't see ourselves as the connectors, as the interconnectors. And we don't see our curiosities and our different roles bringing about a better understanding of those interconnections. And again, it's paradoxical because you are assuming that someone else will connect the dots, but those dots need ways of being in the world that cannot be replicated because there are so many interconnections, and the dimensions are so many at the same time that in your singularity, with your own path of life, your own studies, your own experiences, bring something that no one else can bring to this understanding of the interconnections.
Yes. Yeah. And sometimes, and I just had a conversation with fellow festival speaker Naveen Shan, who we were talking about innovation from the outside, being an outsider. Sometimes people, especially my experience, I'm not in the medical profession, but my experience with people in the medical profession is there's such a respect for the science that they're hesitant to share something that they see or that they think because they don't want to overstep their bounds and they don't want to say something that may not be scientifically accurate. So they don't even want to share an inkling, an insight, an idea, right? Like, hey, this is interesting that this always happens when this happens. I wonder if there's any connection here. Well, we'll let the people who study that, deal with that, which is fine. And I think that's a very admirable hallmark of the medical profession. And at the same time, I wonder how many intuitive leaps we don't make because people aren't sharing those insights. They aren't publicly talking about it to the point where maybe an expert in that field could say, "Oh, that's really, I'd never thought of that." But you know what? You're exactly right. Actually, there is maybe something going on here. I always go back to the idea that Albert Einstein was not a professional physicist. Albert Einstein, as a matter of fact, Albert Einstein was having a hard time finding a teaching job, a professorship. When he developed, the theory of relativity initially, which was I think the singular greatest intuitive leap in the history of physics. We would have probably arrived there eventually, but it may have taken decades had Einstein not made that intuitive leap. And so I just wish that we had the ability and maybe the willingness to just share what we're seeing with each other and, even if it's a really bad idea, put it out in the world so that other people might be able to build on it. And that's what I tell companies all the time. Listen, you probably are thinking something. Your intuition is telling you something right now that you're not sharing with other people because you're afraid you're going to be laughed at. You're afraid that it's not relevant. You don't have the expertise. You're not the right person with the right platform to share the idea. We need to create an environment in which ideas flow freely, but are selected judiciously. We're free in our sharing of ideas, and then we're vigorous in our vetting of ideas. That's the kind of environment that leads to tremendous innovative breakthrough.
There's a phrase I try to use when I'm a writer too, and like you, and I think I use this phrase: let's be a careless creator and a ruthless editor.
Yes, I love that. Yes, yeah. Love that. Yes.
So now that you're talking about what you just said, I was reading about this column you wrote about the productivity profiles, and I think you identify with the drifter, and in the sense that the drifter will lack probably this mapping ability. Now you can explain it better. Yes. But I'm not sure that it's a very bad thing, being a drifter for a while, because basically it's like living in, jumping from one idea to another, following your curiosity, but at least leaving some sort of trace of all the understanding and experiences that you have along the way without trying to systematize or to standardize or to build something out of it, and leave enough time for the collective to swim into those unstructured ideas to possibilitate this collective creative effort throughout time.
Yes. So I agree with you that I think that sometimes so let me back up and explain that concept so that people can kind of follow along. There are three kinds of work that we do. The first is called mapping, which is planning, it's strategy, it's developing a task list, making a priority list for action. The second is what I call making, which is doing the work. So it's executing your plan. So you plan and you do, you strategize and you execute. The third kind of work is what I call meshing. And meshing is the work between the work. It's the little things that we do to keep ourselves aligned and inspired and focused and to develop new skills and make sure that we're prepared to be able to execute our work. So what you were describing, I call the drifter, which is somebody who is really good at making, really good at meshing, meaning that they're constantly asking the right questions, following their curiosity, doing all those kinds of things. But they maybe lack some aptitude for mapping, meaning that they're really good at doing the work and they're really good at ensuring that they're asking new kinds of questions and exploring new territory and developing their skills. But they don't always have the conviction of a strategic plan. Which means that, like for me, for example, I'll get really excited about a project, I'll work on it for a while, and then I'll get really excited about something else, and I'll immediately jump to that next project. And so I tend to leave a wake of half-finished projects behind me because I'm always bouncing to the next thing that excites me. There's nothing wrong with that necessarily unless you never finish anything, right? So if you have, so for example, for me, if I have a strategic project that I'm working on that's very important, there's nothing wrong with me being a drifter in exploring a bunch of other things while I'm at the same time finishing that really important project that I have going on. But if I'm never finishing anything, that becomes a problem. So I've learned that I need to have people in my life who are really good at that mapping part. So I have to have business partners who are good executors, who are people who are good at getting things done, because I tend to be more on the idea side, and I'll work really hard to, if you tell me to do something, I'll do it. I mean, I'll get it done, but I need other people to sometimes to execute the ideas that I have. And once you understand that about yourself, there are some people who are really good at planning and they're really good at meshing or that in-between activity, but they're not really good at getting the work done. Well, they need somebody who's a workhorse, somebody who can just get things done, right? Once you understand your deficiencies or the places where maybe you struggle, you can begin to put people around you to help you stay aligned and make sure that you get your projects done.
I love this because I feel so identified with being also a drifter, and knowing this about myself is really legitimizing something that you usually don't see in the market. Like, you want to start a project, why do we want you for only your ideas? And I think that's something that the world we're building is a world where these ideas are probably the most valuable thing. Knowing that the other productivity profiles are important, but because we have a lot of technology and we have a lot of infrastructure to land a lot of ideas, having the good idea in the first place is paramount, and you cannot have those ideas without being a drifter, because these ideas are really they're not a logical step, the next step or what we already have, but probably in another universe.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And so the ability to make those intuitive leaps, to be able to ask the right questions, and the courage to be able to connect dots that may not necessarily connect on the surface, but for somebody who is able to see the pattern, they can see the connection, even if it's a loose connection. That's a really important skill. I always tell leaders that your most valuable asset that you bring to the organization is your intuition. It's the most important thing. You have to protect your intuition, because your primary job as a leader is to make decisions in the face of uncertainty. That's primarily what you're charged with. And if you don't have the clarity to be able to synthesize, to be able to see the dots and to connect the dots that other people can't see, then you're failing one of your fundamental responsibilities as a leader. So I think that ability to bounce from idea to idea and the ability to see larger patterns is something that you have to focus on developing. It's not something we do naturally and intuitively. As human beings. I mean, we're really wired to protect ourselves. We're wired to seek, food, shelter, and reproduction, right? Are kind of our fundamental things that we're constantly seeking. And so once we have those things, we have to really push ourselves to explore in order to find significance, which is, I think, a much higher order human need, but it's one that many people are willing to forego as long as they have some of the other things that they need. So protect your intuition at all costs.
Yeah, and I think that, after 200 or more years of industrial revolution, where we try to standardize everything in order for us to be productive and have progress and whatever, I think we now know that the future it's much more open-ended. It's much more creative. It needs cognitive flexibility, critical thought, and this word intuition is really being resurfacing now, and it's not so obvious how to legitimize using your intuition when you have all these very hard structures in telling you how to do things, how to do business, and how to do sustainability and how to do education, when intuition will be much more shamanic. And if you're a high leader at a big company that it could be publicly traded, the public won't like too much that the leader is following his intuition. But I think it's so important to do so and to legitimize allowing people to work through intuition.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and that intuition can serve the shareholders and serve the greater organization, in terms of its priorities. But I do think that to some extent there is, it's very important that we recognize that the greatest the cause of the downfall of many organizations, many companies, many institutions is the fact that people understand what to do. So they understand the tactical techniques necessary in order to produce results, but they don't understand why those techniques work. Jim Collins in his book How the Mighty Fall talked about the stages of the decline of once great organizations. And one of the very first things that he talks about is that in many once great organizations, you have people who understand tactics, but they don't understand strategy. They understand what to do, but they don't understand why those tactics work. And when that happens, you often find that in the case of, uncertainty, organizations can't respond because the people in the organization don't have a clear understanding of why those systems and those techniques were developed to begin with. And so you mentioned industrialization. I think often people figure out what works and they prematurely optimize. Donald Knuth said premature optimization is the root of all evil. They prematurely optimize around a set of tactics that seem to produce results in the short term. But because they're not asking the right questions and because they don't understand the genesis of those tactics, they can't adapt when the circumstances change. So we have to, as leaders, we have to protect our pliability. We have to protect our capacity for change. Our intuition is largely tied to our understanding of why. We're not just trying, like, why are we making this decision? Not just what will work right now, but why are we making this decision? Or why is it important that we, move into this particular area of innovation for our business? It may not seem like it makes sense right now financially to do that, but I understand that in order to serve our greater purpose 5 years, 7 years, 10 years from now, we need to be making investments in this area. A great example of that is Amazon started as an online bookstore, and now their servers power most of the largest companies in the world, at least most of the largest tech companies in the world, through AWS, they understood at the heart of it that they weren't an online retailer, that there was something much more important and systemic that they were trying to build, right? Well, that seemed like foolishness when they first made those investments, but now it's the largest part of their revenue model, right? Is this, and the online retail is just the tip of the iceberg. And so that's a great example of intuition at play, even in the face of what seemed like maybe imprudent investment or decisions at first, but ended up becoming a really important play. And so that's what I mean when I say following your intuition. I mean, understanding the bigger sense of why of what you're doing, and then taking the risks necessary and making the investments necessary to support those decisions, even when other people may not have that same intuition, which is why as a leader, intuition is your most valuable asset.
Yeah. And today we're talking a lot about the triple bottom line, and understanding that business are here to generate profit, but also to generate social and environmental well-being. And I do believe that we will have enough standardization and structure to make those things happen. But I think the intuition will give us a why we need to do this, not only because it's fashionable or because of ESG or you want a certification or whatever, but the why of really understanding that everything is interconnected goes much deeper than the rational part of our brains that has been, I was going to say colonized. In a sense, it was colonized by this analytic, rational, industrialized way of thinking, and reconnecting with the essence of life generates life, and we optimized prematurely, and now we are facing a lot of consequences environmentally and socially. So how do you see this intuition flourish in this triple bottom line agenda that we have set for ourselves?
So there are multiple elements of the execution of any important idea. We need the intuition applied to the technical, tactical, the work itself, building the mechanisms that will deliver that future. So, for example, we talk about green energy, we talk about sustainability, we talk about helping people have what they need, but have their needs met while at the same time protecting our finite resources, and making sure that the world isn't used and abused just for our comfort. But we also need that intuition applied to helping craft better stories that help people understand why this is important. I think one of the biggest failures right now in the aspiring sustainability movement is the fact that we primarily use fear tactics, and we also draw lines what feels like arbitrary ways in order to motivate action, instead of helping people understand that, speaking the language that connects with what people really aspire to or what people really want. So, for example, if we could paint a picture for people of why electric vehicles are not just a responsible choice, but actually is going to be a better choice for us long term as a society, right? And what the benefit is of electric vehicles to the consumer, and craft messages that feel less like, we're destroying the world and you are evil because you're destroying the world, and more like, let's help you get more of what it is you want while at the same time doing good. I think those are the kinds of messages that resonate. So we need people applying intuition in all of these different ways, right? I think to some degree, like Tesla did that very well. People drive, in the early days of Tesla, people drove Teslas because they were sexy cars. And oh, by the way, also, I feel like I'm doing good, right? But it was like, that was sort of the afterthought of the idea. It was really more about, like, they were making cars that people craved, that they wanted, right? And so I think that we need, any great endeavor has the execution element of it, but also has sort of the messaging element of it, the branding element of it that has to go along with it. And so I think we need new stories for a better future. think we have to start telling ourselves different kinds of stories, because our stories right now are largely protective. To bring us full circle to the beginning of our conversation, I feel like we're protecting what we have at the expense of what we could have if we exchanged our stories for better ones.
I love that. And yes, to come full circle, you started saying, I feel that my job is to love the people in the room. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the essence, I guess, of this new paradigm of just showing up to whichever rooms you'll be showing up in your day, to love the people, to love the animals, to love the planet, and then
Mm-hmm.
everything will spring out of that. Like
Yes.
we cherish creativity, we cherish love, but we worship productivity, and
Right.
that thing really tips the scale in terms of, okay, this is not so productive, so I'll just go and do things as usual and protecting what we have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is very true. And so again, it's our life is defined by the stories we live out. Not the stories we say we believe, but the ones we actually believe. So we need to replace those stories with better ones if we want to aspire to a better future. And by the way, that applies to, sort of macro global societal frame, but also to our own personal lives. If we want a better life, we have to tell ourselves better stories. We have to believe that we're living in a bigger story if we want to have a bigger life. And otherwise we'll settle into whatever is most comfortable, and we'll settle for whatever we can get and forfeit what we might be able to attain if we were willing to believe a slightly bigger story about why we're here on this planet.
Beautiful. So my last question is about death. You
Mm.
talk about death a lot. You think about death a lot. You even quoted Khalil Gibran now, and talk about how it will walk above your above the cemetery, you know,
Mhm.
and laughing
Mhm.
for the things you didn't really engage with when you were alive. Um, so yes, if we want better stories, how death will be part of those stories, not as the end, but as something that it's worked with, it's even loved, it's even invited in a sense, because
Mhm.
we are going there, and that's not such a bad thing.
Right. Yes, absolutely. So there is a Greek, reportedly a Greek proverb, although I've seen different references to this that may dispute that. But the way I first encountered it was supposedly as a Greek proverb, which says, "A society grows great when old men plant trees in whose shade they know they will never sit." Meaning, a society grows great when people are willing to get outside of themselves and do things that have a benefit to others, knowing that they may never experience that benefit for themselves. If you think about all of the great moments in world history, most of them have been in moments where a society came together and sacrificed for the sake of people who are yet to come. And we're all we're living beneficiaries of their acts of sacrifice. Um, the thing I would encourage people to consider is, what seeds am I planting today that people are going to be experiencing generations from now as shade trees? And if we all lived with that mindset of, every day, I'm just going to plant one or two seeds that are going to grow up into something better. I'm going to care for my neighbor. I'm going to be contributive in a conversation instead of contributing to the downward spiral of social dialogue via my social network of choice, whatever that happens to be. I'm going to encourage people as opposed to trying to rob from them their courage. To discourage literally means to rob heart from them, to rob them of their courage, versus to encourage means to put heart into someone. I'm going to put heart into someone so that they can better pursue their ambitions. I think if we all just took that mindset and realized, listen, very few of us change the world, but everyone has the responsibility to change the world around them. I think that changes the concept of death, I think, in many ways, because if you take that mindset, then your influence lives well beyond your lifespan. Um, you know, I am standing on the shoulders of my grandfather and my great-grandfather and my great-great-grandfather and all that they did to get me to this point. And so I hope that my great-great-grandchild will look back and realize that I had broken new ground for them because I was planting seeds for them before I even knew whether they were going to exist. So I think that that really changes the concept of death, because you might pass away in physical form, but you certainly live on in terms of influence.
I love that. And you talk about dying empty, which I know it's a concept that it's so powerful. And at the same time, when I hear you talk about that, I also sense that yes, I want to die empty, and yet um, full of ideas, and that I know that I won't have time to complete, and I mourn those the brevity of life, and at the same time um, uh, I'm in ecstasies of the brevity of life, in a sense.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think staying cognizant of the fact that we all have finite time on this planet is a fantastic way to remind yourself of the urgency of the moment. That doesn't mean you have to work frantically. It doesn't mean you have to literally work yourself to death, which is how some people interpret that. That's not what I mean. What it does mean is you have to recognize that every single day you are building a body of work, and that every day that passes where you do not make some kind of contribution or plant some kind of seed or move toward those ambitions and those goals that you're uniquely capable of accomplishing is a day wasted, a day where no one will ever get to experience that part of your contribution. Your work isn't for you. Your work is for other people. And again, it doesn't mean to work frantically, but it does mean to work diligently, with a recognition that at some point you're going to point to a body of work and ask yourself, does that represent me? Did I accomplish what I was capable of accomplishing? Did I contribute what I was able to contribute? If that means raising a family that loves one another, great. That's a beautiful body of work. If that means working in a job and just being a very good coworker and encouraging my coworkers all day, and that was the thing that people remembered the most about me, was how encouraging I was and how many seeds I planted. Fantastic. If that means going and building a business empire, right, and employing thousands of people, great. Everybody has their unique thing that they are called, to contribute. But are you doing that? There are people whose lives look very impressive from the outside who are living mediocre lives because they're not making the contribution they could be making. And there are people who may look very modest from the outside who are giants and icons because they're building into a family that is a loving, caring community that is blessing their entire city because of the way that they model love to the people around them. So just be careful not to compare yourself and your body of work to other people's body of work. The goal is to be excellent in your own right, not to chase somebody else's definition of excellence.
Beautiful, my friend. Well, thank you so much for this heart-opening conversation and mind-blowing conversation. And yes, thank you for bringing love to this room and to just being who you say you are.
Thank you so much. And by the way, I have continued to share just what an amazing event the festival was. And I have continued to share far and wide that my experience there was really unlike any other. So if anybody listening has not been or has not attended, I just definitely encourage them to do that because it was a phenomenal experience.
Thank you, Todd. For next time, I would like to pick your brain on where these festivals and conferences are going, and how we have to take risks in order for that to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it again.
All right, my friend. Thank you so much. You have a great day, and let's keep in touch.
Great. Thank you.
Bye-bye.